Hey everyone, I'm Anxiety Offline. In today's video, we're going to take this veneer here and turn it into some finished fingerboards. I'm really excited for this video. I love how these turned out, and I'm super happy to share the process with you. So without further ado, let's jump into it. So real quick, let's go over the materials, everything I got right here. First of all, I got my veneer. So I got one piece of colored veneer that I dyed myself. I have two pieces of plain, like up and down grain veneer. And then I have two pieces of veneer that go, that are grained left to right. And I dyed these myself with tea and coffee. If you want to see how to dye your plies and get them nice and vibrant like this, or like this board here, check out my previous video. I'll link it down below. I have a bunch of tips in there on how to dye plies or dye veneer, and it's pretty helpful, I think. So got my veneer, and these are all nice and dry. They're bone dry. You don't want to press any damp plies at all. I also have OG Gorilla Glue here, or brown Gorilla Glue, and this is just the original plain foaming Gorilla Glue. I've tried the clear Gorilla Glue. I have a bottle over there. I do use that for my brick obstacles for putting the bricks on. But I've tried that for boards, and I've tried this. And whenever I do boards with this, they just come out way more poppy, way more solid feeling. I don't really know how to describe it. I do know that the clear Gorilla Glue, this one, it dries with a little bit more of like a rubbery or silicone consistency, so it's a little bit more gummy. And this one dries more like resiny, more like just super solid. So I feel like that kind of translates into the decks, where these ones definitely feel like my newer ones I've been using the brown glue on feel like way more snappy or poppy. I don't know, the pop's just way more present than it was kind of in my first run of decks. One thing I've noticed, so I have stuck to this one, and this glue does foam, but I'll show you later, we don't really use much of it at all. You don't need much, so the foaming isn't really that big of a deal. Shout out to Mako FB, he makes my molds. This is a custom shape mold that me and him kind of worked together. I kind of told him what I was looking for, gave him some rough measurements, and then he made it happen. I gotta say, I love this mold. It turned out exactly how I wanted it to. The decks just feel really amazing. So I also got 2 sheets of parchment paper here, and these are cut to the size of my mold. So I suggest getting some parchment paper and just cutting a couple sheets, right to the size of your mold, and that will protect your mold from getting any extra glue on there, because you don't want to change the shape of anything here. And then I also have like a disposable, just a Kleenex down over my desk to soak up any of the glue residue. And then I have a little cutout piece of like cardstock, and that's going to be my squeegee. You can really use anything as long as it kind of has like some strength to it. And I like it to be wider than my plies, and you'll see why later. And that is pretty much everything you need, so let's get started. First, move everything important out of the way. And one thing I do, or 2 more things I actually do before I get started, is for any of my dyed plies, I'll run a blow dryer over them just to make sure, even if they do feel all the way dry, I run a blow dryer over to kind of apply some heat and get them like hot, just to know all the moisture is out. And then one last thing I'm going to do is just cut all my plies to size of this mold here. Makes it easier to handle everything, and sometimes if they're varying widths too, I'll trim the widths down just to make sure everything's kind of the same size that way as well. These ones are all good to go though, just trim the tops and we're all set. So now we're good to start gluing and pressing everything. So I like to get all my pieces kind of like in order, everything kind of where I need it. So this is going to be my bottom ply here. So I like to put this one kind of front and center, and then I like to pick out one of these ones to be my top ply. And whatever one you pick out, grab a marker of some type and then mark wherever your nose will be. I usually put a dot in the top right corner, and that'll kind of signify where I want my nose, where the nose will be. So I set that aside. I'm going to put that over here, and then I'm going to take the other plies that need glue and just put them like so. These ones got a little bit overly warped from the heat, but it'll be all good once I get them in the mold. And then these ones I kind of just put wherever. This one I like to put in a special place, because once I put the glue on it, I like to, first of all, I like to not move it when I'm applying glue to it, so I don't get any glue on the bottom. And then once it's done, I have to take it and put it aside completely. And that way I don't get any glue on the bottom ply. Let's go ahead and do that. Start applying our glue. Put your pieces in kind of a rough order. You want to make sure you have up and down grain, left to right grain, up and down grain, left and right grain, and then up and down grain again. And then you don't need much glue, so we'll talk about that now. I like to apply glue to really only 3 veneer and just a simple line like that. That's honestly probably even too much. Then grab your squeegee, and you don't even really need a thin layer of glue. You need less than that. Remember, this glue is foaming, so you really just need to get it into all those micro cracks and crevices in this veneer. And that's as simple as just making sure you got every surface kind of covered. I like to spread it around just to make sure I'm getting the left and the right. Just kind of do one rough pass, kind of getting the glue moved around, and then like a squeegee, move from up to down, like you're squeegeeing a window clean. Maybe do a couple passes if you're missing anything. That's why I like to use a wider squeegee than my actual veneer, and then go up and down, just like so. And you might not think that's enough glue, but I'll show you later, it definitely is. And then as you can see, it didn't move at all, it didn't shift. So carefully pick it up. No glue on the bottom. Top is totally covered. And then I'm gonna put it totally aside. Now let's go ahead and do our next ones. With these ones, it doesn't really matter if you get glue on the bottom because they're gonna be covered top and bottom anyway. So you can kind of just put it wherever and then go ahead and do the same motion. Just make sure you have the left and right side covered, and then squeegee up to down. And all you want to do is just get that glue into all those like little micro like cracks in there, and when it foams up, it'll start to fill everything, and then you'll have a nice deck. I was running into an issue where I was using too much glue. As you can see, I didn't need any glue on this last one because, you know, I had enough left over from just squeegeeing these ones. So that's the perfect amount right there, in my opinion. As you can see, not much left over, which is great. I was running into an issue where I was using too much glue and I was actually having some bleed through to the bottom and top plies. So this is the way that I found to kind of avoid that. So grab our up and down grain one. Now we grab our left to right. Grab our up and down. Another left to right. Try to keep your hands as glue-free as possible. I like to kind of pinch, like push up with your finger and then pinch with your thumb and your middle finger to kind of keep it, just kind of keep it held without really touching it too much. Your top finger, try to keep it, or your other hand, your left hand, try to keep it as clean as possible. You can start to get rid of this. Grab your top ply, making sure you know where your nose is at, and sandwich everything together. Kind of file it like some papers, just make sure you have everything kind of even. So from here, you can kind of go ahead and grab your mold, keep note where the nose and tail is. I like to grab my top mold first, put a piece of paper in here, and then again, noting where your nose is, put that into the mold. Want to be careful not to touch that bottom ply so you don't get any glue on there. Make sure you have the veneer and the piece of paper centered. And then grab your other sheet, put it on top. And then from here it's a little bit easier because you're not touching the wet glue. You can kind of, I like to make my sheets of parchment a little bit wider than the mold, and you can kind of fold it over. You can kind of feel it and make sure that it's in the center. And then from there, from here, I double check just to make sure I can see my nose. And that's lined up with the nose, just going kind of OCD like that. And then I will grab the bottom piece of the mold and fit it on here like so. And you just want to make sure everything is centered as much as possible. So in that motion, I kind of threw it out of center. Just kind of feel it and just kind of push things around to make sure everything is centered, and that looks pretty good. Not sure how well y'all can see that, trying to hold it together, but let's go run and grab it. Let's go throw it into the vise. All right, I figured I'll just grab the vise since it's not nailed down. And then you can fit it in there. And then once it's in there, it's a little bit easier to just kind of make sure it's in the middle. And then make sure your mold is centered within your vise. And then from there, you just gotta tighten it as much as you can, obviously without breaking your mold. I cranked mine down pretty far. This mold is pretty strong. And then even when I think it's too tight, I'll try to get a little bit more out of it. And there you go. Now it's pressed in there. So now, ideally you want to give it 12 to 24 hours, but this glue does dry very, very fast. And it will depend a lot on the temperature and humidity. So it depends on where you're at in the world. If your humidity or weather is different from mine, then this next part could differ. But with this glue, I've found that in this specific area, in the Midwest, with this humidity and temperature, even in the winter, doing this inside, like indoors, around 70 degrees or so, like indoor temperature, I can usually pull a board out in 3 to 4 hours tops, and it's like, it's done. So I'm not the only one either. I've talked to plenty of people who say the same thing. 3, 4 hours, honestly 2 hours, depending on your temperature and humidity. This glue does its thing pretty quickly. Ideally though, you probably want to wait 12 to 24. It's kind of the more proper tried and true way to do it, is to really make sure the glue is dried and cured. But I've pulled boards out within 2, 3 hours, 4 hours, and they've been great. I've had no difference between the ones that I pressed for 4 hours versus the ones that I pressed for 24 hours. So I think that's definitely saying something. Also, one more thing. If you happen to live in a humid environment, a very wet environment, check out this glue I'm going to put on the screen here. I've seen Doom Lagoon talk about it, and he said that it works specifically well in humid or wet environments. All right, so now we have our pressed deck here with the holes drilled and everything. So after this step, what you want to do is find your shaper, and you want to match up your nose with the nose on your shaper. Put that in there, and you want to trace this. And I like to use like a brush tip marker for this, so I know that I'm catching the exact edge of the shaper. There we go. And now we need to trim off all the excess, and there's a variety of ways you can do that. You can use a belt sander, you can use a router, you can even just sand it by hand if you want to. Alright, so once I get my decks back from ABC Parks, they look pretty much like this. He does some of the initial rounding for me. He also does the countersinks, and then of course the routing. And then what we're going to do though is finish these up with kind of some final sanding and final rounding. Got some pretty cool ones here. We're going to work on this one. So I want to hit a couple spots in general. We're basically round out the nose and the tail. We're also going to hit these edges just a little bit. And then on the bottom, it doesn't need that much work. We're just going to go around, I don't know, one or two times around the whole contour, and then focus a lot just on this middle part right here, kind of rounding that out and smoothing that out. And that's pretty much it from there. From there, it'll be ready for clear coat. And for this, I am using 400 grit sandpaper, but you definitely don't want to use anything too crazy. I would say anywhere between 400 and 1,000 is probably plenty for this. It doesn't take much to sand too much off and kind of, you know, essentially not ruin your fingerboard, but misshape your fingerboard. So you definitely want to use more of a finer sandpaper than you would a super rough one. And here I'm just kind of going around the edges, doing a gentle rounding of the contours, and let's see how it looks. It's still pretty squared. I'm going to go ahead and just kind of round these out, get this part done. Like I said, it does not take much at all. So after those couple passes, pretty much good there. Not sure how much you guys can tell on camera, but basically just rounded out these edges here. And then the nose and tail are a little bit still squared off or aggressive. So I grab a piece of sandpaper and I kind of just start sanding this edge here. I'm just kind of working it around a little bit. And I'm using a very light touch for this, not sanding a ton, just enough to kind of just remove a little bit of material, see where I'm at, and then kind of keep going. I'm going to do the same thing now to this tail here. Just try to round out this edge. There we go, feeling pretty good about that. And then I'm noticing just kind of some variations on the side here. So I'm going to go ahead and give these side plies just a nice little refresh here. Just smooth anything out, any marks the router might have made. Just kind of smooth them out, make everything look nice and even. And then usually the side plies just aren't like perfect at a microscopic level, aren't perfectly flat or smooth. You can, when you run your finger over it, you can feel a lot of just kind of micro bumps and stuff like that. So you kind of just quickly sand all that off, make everything nice and smooth. One piece I want to avoid sanding is these parts right here where the wheels would kind of touch, kind of where the board, where the dips kind of start to bend, where the dips are at their most bendy. The board does kind of protrude there in a sense, so when you're sanding, especially when sanding the bottom ply, you want to make sure you always follow kind of the surface of the board and you don't start to sand into these dips here, because it does not take much to sand too much into these dips and you have a very weird looking kind of sand mark there. So I messed up a few boards when I first started by doing that, sanding way too much into these kind of wheel wells here, if you will. So definitely kind of, I avoid those now completely when sanding my decks. Alright, so for me, that looks pretty good. Definitely got some rounding here on the nose, some rounding here on the tail. We softened up these two top edges here, and then I really softened out these bottom edges here. And then did a little work too on the nose and the tail to kind of round those out as well. And just try to make those squared edges where the board has been routed, try to just, you know, just smooth them out a little bit, round them out, and kind of makes just for a nicer feeling, nicer looking board. Alright, so if you want to do paper graphics, now's the time to do them. So I'm going to try to give you a quick crash course on how to do these. So I prefer to use my at-home inkjet printer with the cheapest paper I can find. My goal for this really is to make the paper kind of melt onto the deck, so using a thin paper really helps that process. I use Photoshop to kind of get everything sized right, and then I print it, cut them out, and then I use a white Elmer's glue to do the gluing. It's this stuff right here, it's called Elmer's Glue All. It seems to work pretty well so far, but if you have any better alternatives, definitely leave them in the comments. And what I will do is put a very thin layer of glue on the bottom ply of the fingerboard, and then try to spread it as thinly and as evenly as possible all over the bottom of the deck. And I'll usually have my paper kind of like face down, ready to go right there, taking note of kind of where the nose and tail are, taking note of where the nose and tail are of the deck I'm holding, and then once I get all the glue applied, I'll kind of press it onto the bottom and kind of pick it up that way. And I usually keep like a very soft cloth nearby so I can kind of press the fingerboard down kind of into the cloth to try and get that paper to adhere with that glue in between. And then from there, take a look at it. You might need to manually smooth out some of the bubbles. Be careful not to mess up the print at all. It's kind of easy in that point because the paper kind of becomes a little bit wet from that glue. It helps to have something very smooth nearby to kind of wipe the surface, to kind of get rid of those bubbles without disrupting the surface of the print too much. And then once you get it kind of smoothed down onto the actual bottom of the deck, and before you do any cutting or sanding, ABC Park gave me this tip, and it's a really awesome one. What you want to do is go and put a thin layer of clear coat just on the board, and what that will do is kind of stiffen up the paper, kind of give it a little bit more of a tough matter to kind of sand through, and it kind of makes it a little bit easier in the end, and a lot more of a cleaner edge as well. Obviously, you want to wait appropriate times for everything to dry in between all those steps. But that is pretty much paper graphics. I'm not an expert at it yet, but I'll make it more in-depth tutorial soon. on kind of how to do these, but they're super easy. And then real quick, if you see it delaminating anywhere, like coming off the surface of the deck, what you can do is put some of that glue on your finger and put it in between the paper and the bottom ply and see if you can smooth it out and kind of push it up against the surface. And then in the next step, what we'll do is clear coat it, which will kind of seal everything in. And especially those edges, it will kind of melt everything a little bit together in a sense. So we'll do that step next. All right, the weather is no good right now, but I'm gonna kind of walk you through my clear coat finishing process, and then I'll kind of get some B-roll to kind of fill everything in. But basically, it's super, super simple. You're going to take your finished, sanded fingerboard. It's all been rounded, all ready to go. And you're going to put it up on some sticks. I usually use some foam with some toothpicks so I can kind of elevate it and kind of get both sides kind of up above, in the air. And I usually do the top ply first, so I'll spray one light layer, spray another light layer, and then do some light sanding just on the top ply. From there, I'll do one more layer, maybe two more of clear coat with some sand, with some very light sanding in between. And then the last step is once it's super, super dry, like dry to the touch, I will take either a paper towel or even like a t-shirt, like some type of cloth, and kind of buff that top ply with said cloth. Now, bottom ply, basically the same thing. You're going to put one layer, let it dry, do another layer, and then kind of start doing some very light sanding. I do 2 layers because I want to build up a good layer of clear coat that I can actually start sanding into. So after repeating that process of clear coating, light sanding, clear coating, light sanding, clear coating, light sanding, I will finally apply my final layer of clear coat. And I apply every layer from like a foot over the actual board. I apply it from as far away as I can, but still making contact with the actual object I'm painting, or clear coating rather. And that's usually like about, a foot or a foot and a half above the actual object. I'll do 1 just straight down onto the fingerboard, and then I'll do 2 from each kind of side. Basically just kind of hitting each side, each surface with just a very light spray. And the reason I do top down and then from an angle is so I can kind of get those side plies coated just a little bit as well. And once I apply that final layer of clear coat, I let the boards sit for a good 24 hours. You want to let them degas, cure, dry all the way through so that clear coat hardens up and becomes nice and glossy. Once they are bone dry to the touch, I'll take a paper towel or a cloth to them and kind of buff them out, and that kind of brings out even more of that clear coat shine. And here they are, all finished up. I've been loving these decks. I've been riding them pretty constantly ever since I made them. They are super, super fun. And this has also been a super fun video to make as well. So if you're still here, I really appreciate you watching. Definitely leave a like or a comment if you want to see more content just like this. Also, big shout out to ABC Parks. Me and him bounced a lot off each other, and I learned a lot of this process from him. He makes super high quality wooden obstacles and now fingerboards as well. Check them out over at abcparks.com. I started fingerboarding about 3 years ago now, and back then I would have never thought I would have had my own fingerboard, let alone to hold it in my hands and it functions exactly how I want it to. It's just super, super amazing. I cannot wait to see what the next 3 years have in store. I am so happy with how these turned out. In the past 3 years, I've tried out a lot of different fingerboard shapes and sizes, and I've definitely become acclimated as to what I like and what I don't like in a fingerboard mold. Mako FB helped me craft the exact mold and shape that I wanted, and I love the long wheelbase and the medium kicks and concave. For me, it really is the perfect fingerboard. If you want to try one for yourself, head over to anxiettyoffline.com, and I'll be stocking these ones on Friday, so if you want one of these ones specifically, check out anxiettyoffline.com this coming Friday to secure one for yourself. And that's really about it. If you got any questions, please leave them below down in the comments. I love interacting with y'all, and I will see you in the next video. Thanks so much for watching. Peace.